Okay, today's episode is called Music of Ancient Peoples. Just as a reminder, we started off our first episode was found instruments, prehistoric instruments, going as far back as we can put our imagination to the earliest man, Homo sapien, 300,000 years ago. And so we imagined that this person probably picked up a rock or found a shell and blew into it and created music.
Yep.
Last episode, we focused on Stone Age instruments, the period of the Stone Age, and the first constructed instruments, which consisted of clay pots, ram horn, some bone flutes, and the bull roarer. And today we're going to stick in that time period, and instead of using our imagination with the instruments, what possible music it can sound like, we're going to actually hear some melodies and rhythms that may be direct descendants from that time period. We're talking 50,000 years ago to about 4,000 years ago. This is the Stone Age. And let's see, the Aborigines, here's an interesting fact about the Aborigines of Australia. There has been a DNA study that reveals the indigenous Australian civilization dates back more than 50,000 years. This new study revealed that indigenous Australians are the most ancient continuous civilization on Earth. While there have been claims that indigenous Australians were the world's oldest civilization for some years, this genomic study published in the science journal Nature is the first time extensive DNA evidence has been able to prove it. The study has revealed that not only did indigenous Australians first come to Australia some 50,000 years ago, but they remained almost entirely isolated on the continent until around 4,000 years ago. And that kind of makes sense because without the means of traveling across the ocean, you would assume that they probably just stuck to the continent of Australia. And so the music that we gathered from Aborigine tribes could very well have been passed down from centuries and centuries, and we can have up close approximations. So, comments about what we just listened to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty evident from what we heard that it's primitive. I mean, the music from New Guinea is not really anything spectacular. They're kind of doing the same three notes or whatever instrument it is that they're playing.
And like triplets in the repetitive rhyme.
Yep. And they don't do anything on top of that. It's not particularly rhythmic. And then the cloud chant, there's really no rhythm aside from somebody banging on
the stick.
On a piece of wood
Right.
or
You know what I find fascinating about that piece is their language was very rhythmic, and I don't know if, I mean, obviously we can construct a song where our language is rhythmic, but theirs just seemed to fall, and it just seemed to really produce that rhythmic quality within the chant.
And the cool thing about that chant too, as you were describing, you know, how this is probably passed down, that chant has probably been repeated for tens of thousands of years, and it's sort of an oral tradition of the Aborigines. But that being said, there is really no
complexity.
Right. It's not. I mean, the musical quality of what we've listened to is, I guess the best way to say it is primitive. But interesting that it could have been, you know, passed down through an oral tradition from, you know, you imagine somebody in a stone built, you know, this is Neolithic, I imagine, Neolithic stone hut chanting the same thing that we just heard, which is pretty fascinating.
And the thing that amazes me is that whenever I think of the Stone Age, I'm obviously basing a lot of my material off Hollywood and movies, and they're always very ape-like.
Neanderthals.
They don't have a refined language. They don't have fine motor skills. It seems like, because they're always like, you know.
Right. The tool is a wooden club.
Right. And here they're making these instruments. Like a didgeridoo out of a tree stump or a tree branch. They're hollowing it out and putting in the holes and the mouthpiece or even, you know, like we did the clay pots that we did last time. It was just like, oh my gosh, they really were intelligent and creative, craft-oriented people.
Yeah. And a didgeridoo, the interesting thing about a didgeridoo is they all sound the same, effectively. But there's a particular quality, and I don't know enough about musical crafting to know this, but I would imagine that there is a certain level of sophistication that goes into crafting a didgeridoo so that it has that same quality every time.
Right.
So to your point, I mean, the classical representation of Neolithic people is that they're stupid and primitive, but here we're finding primitive cultures, I'll admit, but making sophisticated and otherwise, you know, somewhat complex music outside of the norm.
Over to the San people, S-A-N. The San people, or the Bushmen, are a hunter-gatherer culture of South Africa. The hunter-gatherer Sands are among the oldest cultures on Earth and are thought to be descended from the first inhabitants, which is now South Africa. A set of tools that are practically identical to the modern sand, what the modern sand people are making, dated 42,000 BC when they were discovered in a cave. So that gives some evidence that there may be some legitimacy to the fact that the Sand people are some of the oldest on the planet Earth. So we're going to listen to some music from the Sand people in South Africa. Okay, we just listened to some songs of the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Impressions?
I liked it. I like it much more than I like the music from Australia and New Guinea. It's more rhythmic. And I was noticing in the one that you played with the chanting that it seems to me to be in an odd time signature. Like if you were to actually clock it out, it would be somewhere. It would be somewhere not, 6/8, 3/4, 4/4 feel. That's pretty standard in Western music. It feels more like an odd time signature.
I think when your music focuses and revolves around rhythm based, then you are going to get that complexity of the time signatures.
Right.
The 6/8s and the what you mentioned.
Right, and which. Again, I mean, similar to the music from New Guinea and Australia, it's primitive in its construction, but complex enough to be unique.
Kwiki kamako, kwiki kamako, ndengeleke kamako, ndanda kamako, kamako, kwiki kamako, kamahai kaka, kamako, kwiki kamako, kwiki kamako, haili kamako, ndogolaka kamako, oh kamako, kamako, kamako lungo, kamako, kamako ndo, kamako. Kamako dondo, kamako twika, kamako twikwi, kamako, Kamako tongala kamako twike kamako twike kamako haya twike kamako hadika kamako hinga kamako hinga kamako kamungo kamako haya kamako kalume kamako kalume kamako twele kamako kalume kamako kalume kamako kalume kamako.
What's fascinating about the Bushmen, especially that you mentioned, and I think that this fact lends credence to the theory about this being passed down, was the tools. You mentioned the tools. Well, the concept of tool making and the tools that they made have remained somewhat similar over the years, tens of thousands of years. It stands to reason that so too would their traditions of music. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really cool with the Bushman people that there's actually a reality about there's a historical reality about that thesis.
Right.
And so I think that this is really cool to listen to. That this is like looking back into the past. Mm-hmm. You can imagine somebody sitting around a fire in a Neolithic hut singing exactly what we just listened to.
Yeah, and dancing.
It
really provides a sense of movement.
Yeah.
I think. Just, yeah.
Yeah. And
it's like, yeah.
They have such a better sense of rhythm,
mm-hmm.
I think, the Bushmen do than the Aborigines and the tribes in New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
But also fascinating that's similar too is that they continue to use chanting, but the chanting of the Bushmen has a unique rhythmic quality to it. They're not so much concerned about the melody as they are with the rhythm.
Mm.
And one of the tracks that we listened to had no instruments at all, and they're using the phenoms in their mouth to produce that
mm-hmm.
that
the
percussion
sound. Like a click track almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, you mentioned imitation of the jungle sounds.
Yeah, one of the sounds that they were making is sort of like a twee-twee, and you imagine it's perhaps a
bird.
Yeah, like a comparison to a sound of their environment.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also fascinating to think about, that they would be trying to imitate nature
right.
while making music, which is probably something
very logical.
Right, which is also probably something that ancient peoples did.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Should I Kit Kat?
No, I'm good. I have a piece of gum in my mouth.
Got it. Any final notes on the San people and the music we heard? Oh, we can segue into Dave Matthews Band.
Yeah.
Should we watch the Dave Matthews CD?
Sure.
Video?
Sure.
Should be the same family.
Ehe by the Dave Matthews Band was written as an evocation of the music and culture of the San people. Dave Matthews recalls hearing the music of the San, and you told me that he was born in Africa.
Yeah, born in South Africa.
So it makes sense that he would be exposed to the music of the San people. And he said upon asking his guide what the words to their songs were, his guide said there are no words to these songs because these songs we've been singing since before people had words. And that's a brilliant line. And you can hear him, you know, he's got that rise and fall melody in the background of his song.
See that they know the answer, no matter the question. I'm wary of those who believe in a neat little world, cause it's just fucking crazy, you know that it is. Confusion. Sometimes I can laugh, but at times it takes all of my my strength just to find enough reason to take the next step. But I will till I do.
And you also have the what appears to be primitive like dancers in the background while he's doing some sort of crazy odd thing in the foreground that to me is disturbing because it evokes that that horror film feel. I see that jerky quality in the horror films I watch, and so I'm not sure what he's trying to get across in that video.
Yeah, the video is odd, but as you were describing it, I also kind of imagine that he's making a parallel to the music because the hee his whole chant that keeps is kind of in the background where his singing is kind of in the foreground. And the same thing here, you've got the African dancers in the background with him in the foreground doing whatever it is but they're dressed more primitively, he's dressed in a suit. And so I think it's a parallel perhaps of the music. There's probably more that he's trying to get across with that, but that's just one thing I noticed.
And I wonder if the jerkiness is a message about the perception of the quality of our music compared to their music. Where their music has flow and rhythm, and that's demonstrated visually by the dancers in the background. Our music is choppy and has this strange quality, unnatural quality.
Yeah.
So the movements he does is unnatural.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because I don't think the dancers were all jerky like that. They're smooth and flow, and he's choppy and whatever.
Yeah. Interesting. Not one of my favorite Dave Matthews songs.
Not one of my favorite Dave Matthews songs, but definitely a good song. I mean, I mentioned before that his drummer is one of the most talented drummers on the planet.
Yeah.
And he's keeping such a simple rhythm, I think, it sounded to me like just on a snare drum, which, again, with the Bushmen, they use that chant as sort of a rhythmic device. And so he's probably doing the same thing. You know, you have the modern drum, the snare drum, that's keeping just a steady tempo. And overlaid upon that is the rhythmic chanting that he's borrowing from, paying homage to the Sand People.
Okay, so I dug up some information about Native Americans. It is not definitively known how or when the Native Americans first settled the Americas in the present-day United States. The prevailing theory proposes that people migrated from Eurasia across the land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska. Then they spread southward through the Americas over subsequent generations. Genetic evidence suggests that at least 3 waves of migrants from East Asia came across, the first occurring at least 15,000 years ago. So, but then it says these migrations may have begun as early as 30,000 years ago and continue as long as 10,000 years ago. So, the music that has been handed down from them, minimally 15,000 years, possibly older. And so we have some music of Native American Indians.
Hey,
And so, what are your impressions?
So, first impressions are that I'm convinced about that fact that you read about them having come over either from the land bridge or if primitive Polynesian tribes. There's the theories that they not transgressed. What's the word I'm looking for? They traversed the Pacific to get to South America, which is perhaps one other theory for how they got there, but striking similarities between the Navajo and the
Australian
Aborigine music. It's the chanting is very similar.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more rhythm, and they have drums.
But the rhythm provides a function.
Right.
It's not necessarily musical.
Right.
It's not there to add any musical interest. It's not there to capture the listener's interest.
It's like a metronome.
It's just there as a metronome, timepiece. It's very functional.
Yep.
And the foreground is the chanting.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, I think the similarities between what we hear in the Aborigine music to what we hear in the Navajo music, I think lends credence to the theory that they perhaps derived from the same ancient cultures.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. Great observation. We listened to some of the Eskimos, and at first I thought it was an instrument, musical instrument. The guica is an instrument that makes a similar sound, hoo 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 hoo. But as you pointed out, and we listened closer, it's their breathing style and their breathing technique that's creating that whispering percussiveness.
Yeah, and it could be it could have been that there's different techniques, breathing techniques to keep your body warm, and so it could be that the Eskimo culture has learned this and then kind of built it into music making.
Right.
But it is cool that their key instrument isn't like their voice, but the air that they're producing and the rhythm that they're producing by breathing in that way.
And it makes logical sense that first comes survival, then as an afterthought comes leisure and creativity. And so we first must learn how to breathe properly in order to increase our metabolism and our heat and our body temperature in order to survive. And then, wow, now that things are calm and peaceful, we can adapt some of that into a musical chant.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because the same logic could provide a reason for why they came to making drums. First is survival. You hunt the game, then you
need something to store them in,
right?
And so you create a bowl,
right? And then you tan the leather
and have a cover for the bowl.
And next thing you know, you pound on it and you got a drum.
Yeah, pretty cool. Okay, speaking of pretty cool, we have one more ancient people to explore. We have the Chinese. Chinese music is believed to date back to between 8,000 and 9,000 years ago, based on the discovery of bone flutes unearthed in the Henan province. The flutes were identified as instruments made in the Neolithic age, which still, to me, is just incredible. I mean, today, 2022, if you were to hand me a bone, I mean, I don't know if I could make a bone flute out of it.
I could probably
I don't
try.
know if I would want. It would come to my mind. You know, I mean,
Right.
I'm done eating and phew, there's the garbage pail.
Right, or make some soup or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't think to make a flute out of it. I
Right.
just think that's incredible. And so, here we have some original music. Well, it says here that the original music of 8,000, 9,000 BC of China has been lost. The existing music is composed by posterities under famous title with the illusions of more powerful influence. Nonetheless, these classical pieces are extremely valuable, and one can embrace the Chinese culture and history by listening to them. So, in a nutshell, all of the ancient music has been lost, but there's so much cultural memory to draw from that the pieces we have here, the oldest Chinese pieces that we do have, probably have archaic remnants of that time period that we can say, aha, this is pretty damn close to what they were playing in that time. So the piece we just listened to is called Ambush from All Sides, and it was a sola pipa piece composition. The pipa is like a lute or a mandolin, but the Asian equivalent. And so I have in my notes, this is like Jimi Hendrix, because it was like a guitar solo. He starts off, he's picking, then literally strumming, and then even scraping it.
It was like a full-on solo.
Yeah, it was like a modern guitar solo.
Right.
And what came to my mind is I use the words modern guitar solo. So, and I even wrote down Jimi Hendrix. Okay, but in one sense, it's inaccurate because it is very primitive. What's going on is the release of primal emotion and energy, and there's a demonstration of unbridledness. So there's almost no technique or no refinement. It's just I'm gonna do anything, like a little kid just doing everything and anything he can think of. And it's very primal.
Well, and the cool thing about Chinese culture, and I think is demonstrated in the pieces that we've listened to, are this one in particular, Ambush from All Sides, it's called. So you imagine that what he's trying to convey is a chaotic scene, right? An ambush, an actual, perhaps a fight where people are fighting and perhaps dying, and so that chaotic ending, you know what I mean, really stands out to
almost anything goes.
Right. But as we'll see with other pieces, they also, the Chinese have this tranquility, right? So
Right,
so
yeah.
they have such a juxtaposition in their music, but I do think again like.
Which
And
is a reflection of their culture. They have
Right.
so many facets of their culture.
Right, and I know you say that it's chaotic and he's really improvised. I think there is a refinement to his technique in what he's doing, even though he's doing something that sounds chaotic. I mean,
Yeah.
you got to imagine like even Jimi Hendrix when he was doing, he knew what he was doing. You know what I mean? So I do think that there is a refinement to what he's strumming
Okay.
in some way. I don't know what that way is. I'm sure,
Right.
but I think that
There's
also
a method to the madness.
right. But that also speaks to the fact that this has been passed down for so many generations that refined picking that he's doing, even though it sounds chaotic, probably comes from ancient techniques.
Right. At the end, it was very clear he was doing some finger passages, or maybe arpeggios.
And the other thing about Chinese culture is they don't forget their history. I mean, this piece probably is telling a story about something that occurred, or about a story that is.
I agree. I think a lot of their music and the music that we're about to listen to are very story oriented.
So I imagine that what he's actually trying to do is convey whatever story it is that's taking place in this piece.
Come to think of it, I think you're really hitting a mark on the fact that history probably wasn't initially written.
No, it wasn't.
And so they probably transmitted their historical stories through the music.
And I was gonna bring that up as well. I mean, I don't. This may not be 100% accurate, but I know at one point of Jewish history, they couldn't read the Torah, so they didn't have a Torah, so they had to pass down the Torah through oral tradition.
By singing it.
By singing it or by reciting it as best as they could, and so. As I recall, I made, again, this may not be 100% correct, but the modern Torahs are based on the oral tradition of, I think it was called the HaTorah, which was them saying the Torah and passing it down. So, in my mind, if we have instances of this already occurring in history, there's nothing to say that the Chinese weren't also doing that.
Right.
And yeah, I do think that a lot of especially although I think the Chinese had written language well before most other cultures, I do think a majority of their history has been passed down through oral tradition.
Sure.
And reflected in the music, like you say. We just listened to three pieces: offerings, sacrifices,
Flowing Waters, and Dragon Boat, and all three of them appear on this album called Chinese Ancient Music.
Mm.
And so we're getting the impression of 10,000 years ago, ancient China. Speaking of impressions, yours?
I really like it, and again, I think the three pieces or more that we've listened to, they're all so unique
Mm-hmm.
in what they're trying to convey.
Yeah.
Dragon Boat seems to me to be a little bit more, I don't know, the imagery that comes to mind when I hear the phrase Dragon Boat is something like a Greek bireme with Greek fire spitting out, you know what I mean? I imagine it's something like that. I could be totally wrong, but that's just the imagery that comes to mind. So
Sure, I agree. I have the same imagery.
the image that comes to mind when listening to that music and keeping in with the theme of the title of the song is more warlike. Whereas 18 songs of flute, I forget what the full track was,
Of the Nomad Flute.
of the Nomad Flute. Is
Very
more,
serene.
yeah, more tranquil.
Mm-hmm.
You imagine kind of sitting in a mountain,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's traditional Buddhist style
Right.
houses in the mountains and very peaceful scene. Flowing waters. I know that a lot of the Chinese are into that. I think Zen is a Japanese thing, but you know that quality of nature and being kind of
Being one with your environment.
one with your environment and still, and so all of the pieces that we've listened to are so different in what they're trying to convey, but
But the one thing that is common throughout, and we mentioned this, is the musicianship
Yep.
and the the refined expert technique
Yep.
of the performers.
Yep, and exactly. And again, it speaks to, I think, just history being written, as you said earlier, in music as being sort of passed down as a part of history. Not necessarily written down, but
And-
played.
I mean, I believe Offering Sacrifices is the one that has the percussion
Oh.
solo, or that was Flowing Waters.
Mhm.
It had the percussion solo. I mean, that guy was just incredible. On what was the instrument? It wasn't a
Oh.
xylophone, but you looked it up.
Yeah, it was like a
Guzheng.
guzheng or something like guzheng,
Yeah.
which is it's a stringed sort of lap steel guitar that you play with these little, it looks like spoons. Play them sort of
Balance.
like a, yeah,
Uh huh.
you play them sort of like a xylophone.
Right. Oh yeah. he was definitely.
And you got to imagine the precision that you have to have with striking the string that are probably, you know, half an inch apart, and you don't hit the other string.
Right.
To speak to the refinement of the technique. But the other thing I noticed too, and I think you brought this up, was the scaling. They have a better sense of music theory.
Yeah, compared to the others that we encountered the Aborigines of Australia, then the San people, the Bushmen from South Africa, then the Native Americans, and most of those were focused on, we mentioned, rhythm and chanting. And here now we're starting to get into concentration on refining the melody.
Yep.
And very indicative of ancient melodies is using a pentatonic scale, or a variation of that. It's very pentatonic, and it stands out. You can, out of any of the pieces, even if you don't know anything about music theory, da 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 da. It's very Asian sounding. You're that quality that hits your ear is the pentatonic quality.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but again, I mean, I think this particular session has been, I think, the most evolutionary of the ones that we've listened to. Like you say, we started off with Aborigines, which is semi-melodic, semi-rhythmic. The Bushmen are more rhythmic. We're getting a little bit more melodic. The Chinese are full refined. I guess there are some cases where there are, the percussion is very rhythmic, but it's also super melodic and complex.
Tune percussion.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's
exactly.
the first instance that we've encountered with tune percussion.
Right. And which is, I mean, of all of the music that we've listened to, I'm between the Chinese and the San, which I like the most. But of all of them, I can say that the Chinese are by far the most refined.
Well, that brings us to what were your favorite parts out of today's episode?
Yeah.
What were your favorite parts?
Again, I gotta say I'm between the San people and the Chinese. I love the rhythms of the San people. It's fun. Makes you want to dance. but the Chinese, I can appreciate, the complexity of the music that they're putting together, the musicianship of the musicians that are playing it. And again, I think the cool thing that I mentioned earlier about the Chinese culture is that they are so in tune with their history that I do think a lot of the pieces that we've heard from the Chinese invoke a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably either a story from Chinese mythology or legend, or it is a true story of history.
Right.
I
would definitely agree with
I'm
that.
between those two, but I don't know which I like more.
Okay.
Different settings, I guess, would be the answer.
Regarding the San people and their music, what word best describes their music?
I don't know. I mean, rhythmic is the first word that comes to mind because there is such a focus on rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want that to be the word that best describes it, because there's more to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go with rhythmic because nothing else is coming to mind. But I'm just thinking about, and I know you brought up this imagery earlier of sitting around a fire and somebody starts to play something rhythmic and then all of a sudden people are clapping a rhythm and they're dancing. And
that tribal comes to my mind.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the image that you just produced is what I picture when I hear that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what word best describes the Chinese music from what we've listened to?
I mean, again, the word that keeps coming to mind for the Chinese is refined.
Mm-hmm.
The
and precise.
Very
Use the word precise.
Very precise. Even when they sound like they're being chaotic, there's a precision to what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I mean, the cool thing about the Chinese is that they're all telling a story. So, it's refined, but it's also just so creative in the way that they produce that,
Refined creativity.
Right, exactly, yeah. Refined creativity.
The two words.
The two words that best describe the Chinese music.
So let's stick with Chinese. Regarding the Chinese music, or maybe I should broaden it up. Out of any of the pieces that we did in today's episode, would you recommend to a friend?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I would recommend the Aborigine. The Navajo music was cool, and I think that it's worth listening to from an American perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The Eskimo music, I think, is cool from a fact of that they're producing that out of breathing. But there would be none that I would really recommend to listen to leisurely.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more like I'm trying to tell you something about the piece that we're listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do think that the San music, and particularly the Dave Matthews piece, is probably something that I would recommend to people, just on the basis of that, it's more modern, people are more likely to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would then add in, oh, hey, you listen to this Dave Matthews piece, and then let me show you what he's actually paying homage to.
Yeah. When I listened to the San music, the Bushman album, I literally thought, I'm going to listen to this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, it really is.
It's cool, and again, I mean, the thing that really fascinates me about all of this music is that, and particularly with the San people, because we have a historical fact of the tools, is that you can imagine somebody 50,000 years ago hearing what we're hearing,
On their iPod.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The modern version of the iPod. The ancient version of the iPod. Yeah. But no. But I mean, it's. I often have this thought when I'm thinking about whether I'm in a historical place or I'm hearing something historical or I'm looking at a historical thing. I often have the thought about what somebody who was alive contemporaneous to that thing was doing. And I think with the Bushmen, you really get it.
Yeah.
Because it is passed. It's very likely passed down through oral traditions.
Understood. Completely agree.
So that's cool. The only other thing I wanted to add was, and I know that we often ask what the pieces are supposed to represent, and I had somebody had said it previously about the San people that they're utilizing the natural sounds, perhaps of the birds and their environment.
Right.
And so the cool thing about that, and even with the Chinese too, is
I mean their titles of their pieces, flowing water,
right,
running water,
is that they're either invoking history or they're invoking
dragon boat.
They're invoking their environment.
Yeah.
The 18 songs of the flute probably has something to do with Chinese geology.
Well, here's an interesting hypothesis that the imagination, the faculty, the cognitive faculty for you to create an image in your mind wasn't very developed back then. And so their storehouse of creativity had to come from what their senses were giving them.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hearing that water, and I'm going to do something with it on my instrument. Or I'm hearing that bird, and I'm going to do something similar with my instrument. But 50,000 years ago, the hypothesis is that not all of our faculties that we have today were flourished, and the ability to imagine something from nothing wasn't necessarily as potent as it is today. And so I think that lends credibility to the fact that their music is based on environmental sounds.
Yeah, and even I suppose the Aborigines with the didgeridoo. I imagine that they're trying to recreate something in their environment. I don't know what that sound would be, but
I don't know either. Elephants or giraffes. Giraffes can sing that deep bass? No, I'm making it up. Giraffes can't.
They don't have vocal cords.
They don't have vocal cords. Couldn't get that by you.
But no, I mean, just as a final remark about all the music is that it's so fascinating how they're all so different but all kind of the same in what they're trying to convey.
They share something.
Yeah.
There's a thread of commonality that connects all people.
Yeah, right.
There you have it.
Stone tools.
All right. We'll end with that. Until next week.